I hate this. I have to re-record because you fucking OBS Studio. Ugh. Why? Why did you not record all of my audio? Why? In 1973, then OPEAC, which now today goes by OPEC, enacted an oil embargo against any country that happened to help Israel during the Yom Kippur War. After gasoline prices more than quadrupled and led to high unemployment and massive inflation all over the price as the primary input of all inputs, if you don't see how, oil prices affect grocery prices, this is so simplistic and silly that it's insane. I mean, I don't know how anybody could be ignorant about this. All the stuff that comes into the grocery store comes from somewhere else. It comes into the back end of the store on big trucks. I mean, if you've ever seen behind the store and into the loading bay, you know it's coming in on these big trucks that are taking in the inventory and everything to the store. And there really usually isn't that much but space in the back either. Stuff's coming in and then it's being, placed on the shelf by the store employees who, eventually process the inventory that's come in and put it on the shelf for everybody else. But it comes in from somewhere else, and all those big trucks that it comes in on use oil. They use diesel, for the most part, and it comes in that way to the back end of the store. So if the price of transporting the goods to the store rises, then that's going to be reflected in the price of groceries, which will have to go up in reaction to all of that. Anyways, after gasoline prices more than quadrupled and led to high unemployment and massive inflation, which all of the rule books said should not happen and should not be possible, all over the place as the primary input of all inputs. But it was possible because, I mean, let me put it like this: the models may have said it wasn't possible, but if you have a situation where there's a commodity shortage, you can't money print your way out of it, or whatever, because you can't make more oil reach your economy, by just making more money or whatever, by printing more money. Money printer going burr won't fix that situation. So after gasoline prices more than quadrupled and led to high unemployment and massive inflation all over the place because it was the primary input of all inputs and it had quadrupled in price, the rich and ambient and affluent decided that they needed to brainwash the public with propaganda and bullshit in order to recapture the narrative and reshape public opinion in their image by miseducating the public and lying to them. With propaganda, bullshit, lies, and deceit. That's what the think tanks produce all over the place. But the thing is that although some Jews might be offended by this, Nazis, not by this, like the Nazis, Reagan had found his scapegoat. Hitler blamed, the Jews. Reagan said it was the government. He said it was government interference in the private sector, and business was strangling private enterprise and holding it back, and that all we had to do to get the economy to flourish again was to, basically get government off the back. No one ever went broke betting against the intelligence of the American people. They believed him because they were too stupid to know how full of shit this statement was. Here's the obvious question that so few asked. Governor Reagan, what the actual fuck does government interference in the economy have to do with stagflation? When every economist agrees was primarily caused by OPA EAC's oil embargo. Oh, you don't have an answer. I'd submit it's because you're a liar. You don't know what you're talking about, and it has literally nothing to do with the present crisis. Governor Reagan, the oil embargo was not imposed because American workers had unions, and yet you fired all the airline workers and everything that went on strike, or because the federal government regulated business, but here you were cutting taxes. That didn't work out. You ended up raising them 11 times. It was imposed because the United States backed Israel against Egypt and Syria in the 1973 war. You're blaming domestic social democracy for the cost of foreign policy and oil dependence. The oil embargo and later oil price shocks were the main events. Most of the other explanations were drops in the buckets as explanation for why the crisis began, even if it mattered later in determining how inflation, you know, they mattered later in the sense that, they determined how inflation persisted and how policymakers responded. Probably likely misinformed policymakers that were responding to things that were a drop in the bucket compared to the oil embargo. Other factors may have shaped the duration and policy response, but as causes of the stagflationary rupture, they were small compared with the oil price shocks. Reagan and Thatcher used those secondary factors to change the subject from energy dependence and geopolitical vulnerability to government regulation and organized labor, which were true innocents who which contributed not even the slightest bit. Not they submitted 0 point represent zero. So a zero followed by an infinite progression of zeros was their contribution. Percent was their contribution to it. Nil. They contributed absolutely nothing to the inflation or the stagflationary crisis we were in. They were true innocents. They were being scapegoated. Despite the fact that despite this fact, this rhetoric resonated with the public, and despite the fact that it did so, it was nothing more than a comforting lie. Just because you love bullshit does not make it true. The fact is that government regulation and organized labor were complete innocents who had literally nothing to do with stagflation, and Reagan and Thatcher's rhetoric were an attempt to cloud the issue. Cloud the issue, avoid a difficult discussion about our alliance with Israel and the damage it was doing to the United States economy, and the damage it was doing to the United States economy to have it sided with the thorn and the side of the Middle East. For religious reasons, these people did not want to talk about how simply ceasing arms sales to Israel would do wonders for our economy. It's the elephant in the room, and it's what Reagan served to distract us all from. Ronald Reagan, much like Hitler, took advantage of the crisis and deceived the public. Unfortunately, the public loved his lies, and so they voted for it instead of the truth. We also failed back then to learn the lesson, which was that this can happen whenever. It can and it will happen again, and even now it will happen again. As long as we remain as addicted and dependent to oil as we are, it is inevitable. We will be economically insecure and vulnerable to people who use the choke point to cut off our oil supply. You know, Whenever they get upset about something they do, they have an effective veto over all of it. And so they can just choke off our oil supply and everything. And so what we need to be doing is spreading, and everybody needs to be buying electric vehicles. People that, you know, are in the shipping business and are doing and bringing food to our stores need to be electrifying their fleets and getting away from diesel trucks and getting electric trucks and everything. And this needs to happen at much faster. And it needs to not let up just because of the fact that the crisis has passed and it's over. There's no reason to stop electrifying America just because the crisis has passed. Because again, this is going to happen again, and we need to be prepared for it when it does. Just because the current crisis has, receded doesn't mean this crisis is not inevitable and is not 100% guaranteed to happen again at some point. It is absolutely guaranteed. I have no doubt whatsoever, and I think anybody who thinks otherwise is fucking psychotic. It is 100% guaranteed to happen again. So as long as we remain, you know, addicted and we remain dependent on fossil fuels, we are going to be vulnerable. And for national security purposes, we need to diversify away from oil dependence. We need to be electrifying our fleets by buying electric vehicles, giving the necessary upgrades to the grid, to make it a smarter grid, and everything to support all of this and everything and making those investments and getting the hell off of oil altogether. As long as we remain dependent on fossil fuels in the United States, we are going to be vulnerable. And the only thing that really breaks the wheel and everything, which is what we need, is to find other ways, other sources of energy, and other means to move our bodies and our shit, our stuff around.